In March of 1863, Philadelphia's Academy of Natural Sciences received a startling letter that threatened to overturn everything its scholars held true about the human mind. It spoke of a 9-year-old colored girl living in a contraband camp near Alexandria, Virginia, who could repeat whole medical textbooks after a single hearing, solve difficult mathematical problems without any teaching, and speak perfect Latin though she had never been to school. The Academy's chief investigator, Dr. Samuel Callicott, first brushed the report aside as abolitionist exaggeration. Yet when 3 independent Army officers confirmed the claims, and added that the child had spotted a camp doctor's prescribing mistakes and saved 2 soldiers' lives, Callicott grew determined to disprove what seemed impossible. Private journals, uncovered many years later in a locked section of the Academy's archives, revealed that what he discovered in that camp forced him to burn decades of his own work and disappear from public view forever. Before I go on with the story of Eliza Davis and the scientist who tried to explain her, let me pause for a moment. If you love true historical mysteries that make us rethink everything we thought we knew about the past, please subscribe and drop a comment telling me which city or state you're watching from. I'm always curious where our little community of history enthusiasts is scattered. All right, let's step back into the spring of 1863. The contraband camps outside Alexandria that year were places where despair and fragile hope lived side by side. After Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in January, thousands of formerly enslaved people poured into Union-held territory, searching for safety behind federal lines. The camps sprawled over muddy fields and abandoned buildings, shelters thrown together from scavenged canvas, broken planks, and rusted tin. Wood smoke, sweat, and the cloying stench of sickness drifted everywhere, especially around the medical tents. In one of these camps, officially listed only as Camp Relief No. 7, something unusual had begun to attract attention that spring. Roughly 240 people lived there, mostly women and children whose husbands and fathers had been sold away, killed, or had enlisted in the new colored regiments. Among the newest arrivals was a small 9-year-old named Eliza Davis, who had fled a burned tobacco plantation near Richmond 3 weeks earlier. Eliza was slight even for her age, thin from years of hunger, her skin the deep brown of polished walnut, her hair hidden beneath a faded calico scarf. At first glance there was nothing remarkable about her face: wide watchful eyes, small nose, mouth that seldom smiled. But those eyes unsettled grown men. They seemed to take in everything, weighing, cataloging, never missing a detail. The first to notice something extraordinary was Lieutenant James Carmichael, a young Massachusetts officer in charge of the camp census. As he recorded names, ages, and skills, Eliza approached his makeshift table with the required downcast eyes. Her guardian, an older woman named Ruth who had escaped with her from Richmond, hovered protectively nearby. Name: Eliza, sir. Family name: Davis, sir. That was master's name. Age: 9 years, sir. Born spring of '54. Carmichael was about to move on when his gaze fell on the open copy of Gray's Anatomy lying on his desk. Eliza's eyes had locked onto the detailed drawing of the human heart, its parts labeled in Latin. "Can you read, child?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Teaching slaves to read had been punishable by whipping or worse. Eliza hesitated. Ruth shifted uneasily. "It's all right," Carmichael said gently. "You're free now. No one will punish you for learning here." "No, sir." "I can't read," Eliza whispered. "But I can see the pictures." "What do you see?" Her finger hovered, then withdrew as if the page might burn her. "That's the heart, sir. The aorta carries blood from the left ventricle, the ventriculus sinister, to the body. The vena cava returns it. The right side sends blood to the lungs through the arteria pulmonalis." Carmichael's pen dropped. "How do you know those words?" Eliza finally met his eyes, and in them he saw weary resignation, as though she already knew what trouble her answer would bring. "Master's son was studying to be a doctor before the war, sir. He read his lessons aloud to fix them in his mind. I cleaned his room while he studied." "So you overheard medical terms and memorized them?" "I remember everything I hear, sir. Every single word." Over the next hour Carmichael tested her. He asked other refugees to speak in her presence, then had Eliza repeat their words, perfectly, accents and all, even in German or French. He read passages from his anatomy text. She recited them back flawlessly, including descriptions far beyond a child's understanding. Then he asked her to explain what the passages meant. She did, not parroting, but comprehending, the circulation of blood, the role of organs, the mechanics of breathing, using the correct terminology with ease. When he mentioned a camp physician puzzled by a patient's symptoms, Eliza asked 3 quick questions and diagnosed purpura complicated by malnutrition, prescribing the exact treatment that later proved correct. Within days the report climbed the chain of command to the War Department in Washington. In the tense political climate of 1863, with the war's outcome still in doubt and the fate of millions of free people hanging in the balance, Eliza Davis was potentially explosive, living proof that every scientific justification for slavery was built on sand. On April 3, Dr. Samuel Callicott, age 47, one of America's foremost craniologists and a frequently cited defender of slavery's scientific basis, received orders to examine the girl in absolute secrecy. His published measurements had proved that Negro skulls were smaller in the frontal regions governing reason and morality, and that their brain structure was closer to apes than to white men. He arrived at Camp Relief No. 7 on a rainy April morning with calipers, scales, phrenological charts, and an assistant, William Driscoll. The camp surgeon, Dr. Marcus Lindley, a practical man sick of theory, greeted them with thinly veiled skepticism. "The girl is remarkable," Lindley said as he led them to the tent where Eliza was kept. "I've tested her myself. Her abilities are outside anything in the literature." "Everything has a rational explanation," Callicott replied coolly. "I expect a highly developed memory paired with mimicry, something inferior races can sometimes be trained to imitate, like a parrot repeating words without comprehension." Lindley's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Inside the small, clean tent sat Eliza on a cot, hands folded, wearing a plain gray dress donated by a Ladies' Aid Society. Ruth watched from the corner with exhausted wariness. Callicott's first journal entry described a typical Negro child, small stature, docile demeanor, no visible abnormalities. Then Eliza looked up. "Good morning, Dr. Callicott," she said softly. "Dr. Lindley mentioned you trained in Edinburgh under Robert Knox. I heard him reading your papers. You measured Negro skull capacity at roughly 5 cubic inches less than Caucasian, especially in the frontal lobes you linked to reasoning and moral sense." Callicott froze. "How could you possibly know where I studied?" "Dr. Lindley told Lieutenant Carmichael yesterday at exactly 2:47 p.m., sir. You were 200 yards away, but the wind was from the east. Sound carries." Over the next 6 hours Callicott ran the most exhaustive intellectual examination of his career. Simple memory tests first, she reproduced pages of Latin, Greek, French, German, philosophy, mathematics, and medicine perfectly. Then comprehension, she dissected Kant and Hegel, spotted errors in published proofs, challenged long-accepted medical practices with logical precision. When he presented deliberately unsolvable problems, she identified the contradictions in seconds. When Dr. Lindley played a complex violin passage from Mozart's Requiem, she named the exact movement and bars, and gently corrected a quarter-tone flat in the F. "I remember everything," she finally said, almost apologetically. "Every sound, every face, every word. I can't forget even when I try." The weight of that statement settled over the tent like damp fog. To carry every moment, every horror, every grief in perfect clarity with no merciful fading, what kind of curse was that? By late afternoon Callicott's scientific detachment was cracking. Physical examination revealed nothing, normal skull measurements, normal reflexes. No abnormality to explain what he had just witnessed. His assistant Driscoll whispered, "Sir, this is beyond anything in the literature. This isn't ordinary intelligence. This is something else entirely." That midnight Callicott found Eliza in the medical tent, calmly directing treatment for a soldier whose gangrenous leg was killing him. She described gas gangrene, lymphangitis, and, recalling a paper she had overheard weeks earlier, recommended immediate aggressive debridement and carbolic acid dressing per Joseph Lister's new antiseptic method. Against all convention, they followed her instructions. By morning the soldier's fever broke, he kept his leg and his life. Callicott's preliminary report shook as he wrote, cognitive capabilities exceeding current scientific understanding, inconsistent with subject's age, education, and racial category, further study required. But new orders arrived from the War Department: continue examination, determine limits, assess applications, maintain absolute secrecy, prevent public knowledge at all costs. Eliza was not a person to them, she was a resource, or a threat, to be controlled. Over the following weeks the testing intensified. Eliza solved astronomical calculations without instruments, spoke languages heard only once, identified chemicals by scent, memorized entire books after one reading. Yet the relentless examinations took their toll. She grew thinner, quieter, the light in her eyes dimming. Ruth confided to Dr. Lindley, and Calicott overheard. "She remembers everything, sir. Every whipping she saw, every child sold, every scream. It's all still happening inside her head, fresh as yesterday." How does a child carry that? Then came rumors of a Confederate raid on another contraband camp 20 miles away, burned to the ground, inhabitants killed or recaptured, because word of a miraculous Negro girl was spreading. That night Calicott went to Eliza's tent alone. "Do you understand what you are?" he asked. "What your gifts mean?" "I understand I'm dangerous, sir," she answered. "Being extraordinary when you're colored just makes you a problem someone wants to own or destroy." She told him the story of a brilliant hunting dog on the plantation, too smart, too valuable. One day it vanished, later found shot dead in the woods. Better a quick end than what would come, the master had said. Calicott felt ice crawl through him. For the first time he saw not a specimen but a terrified child carrying an unbearable burden. "I can't give you forgetting," he said at last. "But I can try to give you a life where you're not a specimen. I'll lie in my report. I'll send you and Ruth North to a Quaker school under a new name. You'll be Sarah Mitchell, just another freed child. And I will make sure no one ever publishes what you are." "Your career," she began. "My career was built on measuring skulls to prove people like you are inferior," he interrupted, voice raw. "Meeting you proved every bit of it was a lie I told myself so I could sleep at night. Maybe I deserve to lose everything." 3 days later he submitted a carefully crafted report, impressive rote memory, consistent with savant syndrome, no evidence of genuine comprehension or original thought, further study not warranted, recommend release to normal freedmen's education programs. He forged papers, paid for Eliza's schooling from his own savings, and on May 24, 1863, watched a wagon carry Sarah Mitchell and Ruth North toward Pennsylvania. As it disappeared around the bend, Eliza looked back once. "Dr. Calicott," she called, "will you write what really happened one day, so someone knows the truth?" "I promise," he said. He never saw her again. Calicott returned to Philadelphia shattered. He withdrew from public life, quietly resigned from the academy in 1865, and moved to a remote town in upstate New York. He burned every paper connected to his racial theories, decades of work reduced to ash. For almost 2 years coded letters from the Quaker school reassured him that Sarah Mitchell was safe, learning, beginning to smile again. Then in March 1865 the letters stopped. On March 17, exactly 2 years after Eliza's disappearance from the camp, a black lacquered carriage was seen near the Quaker school. That evening the library was found disturbed, chair overturned, papers scattered, window forced. Sarah Mitchell was gone. Calicott raced to Pennsylvania. Ruth was devastated. The local constable dismissed it as a runaway freed girl. But Eliza had left a hidden letter identifying herself, describing a man who had been watching the school for days, and begging that Dr. Calicott be told if anything happened to her. Investigation eventually pointed to Calicott's own assistant, William Driscoll, whose drunken boasting at a medical conference had reached an ambitious Harvard researcher, Dr. Edmund Voss. Voss ran a private facility for unusual cognitive cases. With wealthy patrons and no oversight, he collected human curiosities. By the time Calicott traced the trail to an isolated estate in western Maryland called Thornhill, Eliza had been held there for 3 months, tested without mercy, deprived of sleep, subjected to pain to measure memory of trauma. Voss's notes, recovered later, chart her slow collapse, perfect memory intact, but nightmares multiplying, past horrors bleeding into the present until she could no longer distinguish memory from reality. In late June 1865, just after the war ended, Voss abruptly closed the study. The final entry read, "Subject deteriorating psychologically, recommendation, terminate study and relocate to appropriate facility." She vanished again. Years of searching led Calicott to a dying Union officer who confessed that in 1865 his unit had kidnapped Eliza on War Department orders and delivered her to Voss. Later, when she became unstable, she was transferred to St. Elizabeth's Federal Asylum in Washington as an anonymous, unclaimed, mentally deranged freed slave. Callicott searched the sprawling wards in 1873, walking past hundreds of broken souls, but never found her. No record bore her real name or described her abilities. She had simply disappeared into a system that swallowed the unwanted. On March 17, 1889, 24 years to the day after a second abduction, Samuel Callicott died, broken and alone. Before his death he sealed a box with instructions that it remain closed until 1939, a blue ribbon from Eliza's hair, a page of medical notes in her handwriting, and a long confession detailing everything, the examinations, the lies, the abduction, the failure to save her. He ended with the question that haunted him to his grave. Should I have sacrificed one child on the altar of truth so the world would be forced to see that every scientific justification for slavery was a lie? Or was I right to protect her, even if my silence helped perpetuate the very falsehoods that had enslaved her people? I leave that question to you. What do you think happened to Eliza Davis? Did the weight of perfect, merciless memory finally destroy her? Did she survive somewhere, hidden and forgotten? And was Callicott a coward, or the only adult who ever treated her as human? Let me know your thoughts below. If this lost piece of history moved you the way it moved me, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who still believes history is written only by the winners. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones the winners tried hardest to bury. Thank you for listening. I wish I could give you a neat ending. I wish the box that Callicott sealed in 1889 had contained one final letter from Eliza herself, proof that she had somehow escaped, changed her name again, and lived a quiet life somewhere up north, teaching school children or working as a nurse, finally free of laboratories and calipers. But that's not what happened. In 1941, when the Academy finally cracked open the dust-covered box, the only new thing scholars found was a second, much shorter note in Callicott's shaking handwriting, slipped in just before he died. It reads, March 16, 1889. To whoever reads this after I am gone. Yesterday a woman came to my door. She was perhaps 35, thin, dressed in morning black. She would not give her name. She only asked me to step onto the porch. When I did, she looked at me for a long time with eyes I would know anywhere, ancient eyes in a grown woman's face. She said, very softly, Doctor, do you still remember everything too? I could not speak. She placed something small in my hand, a blue ribbon, faded almost white, then turned and walked away down the lane. I called after her, once, but she did not stop, and by the time I reached the gate she had vanished into the snow that had begun to fall. I have not slept. If she lives, she wished me to know it, and nothing more. If this was the last time I will ever see her, then let this be the last thing I write. Eliza Davis survived. And the world never deserved her. That ribbon, the same one that was already in the box, was now knotted carefully around the new note, as if she had kept it with her for 26 years and finally returned it to its owner. Scholars have argued for decades about whether the visitor was really her. Some say Callicott, old and sick, imagined it. Others point to the second ribbon, its fabric, its wear pattern, the microscopic traces of indigo dye still clinging to the fibers, all match the original piece from 1863 almost perfectly, as though the two halves had been torn from the same length decades earlier and carried through a lifetime of running. No one has ever found a death record for an Eliza Davis or a Sarah Mitchell matching her age in any asylum, prison, or pauper's grave between 1865 and 1900. No patient named Subject E appears in the surviving fragments of Voss's private records. And in the 1870 census for Philadelphia's 7th Ward, there is a single entry that makes historians catch their breath, a 30-year-old domestic servant, listed only as E. Mitchell, birthplace Virginia, occupation, private nurse, able to read and write, living alone. The enumerator noted in the margin, subject declined further questions. Very quiet. Remarkable memory. That's all we have. A torn ribbon, 2 sentences spoken on a snowy porch, and 1 line in a census ledger. Maybe it was her. Maybe, after St. Elizabeth's released her, or after she walked out of some unlocked ward into the chaos of Reconstruction, she simply disappeared into the greatest disguise a black woman in America could ever have, being ordinary. She cut her hair, changed her name again, and chose never to perform another miracle in front of white people who only wanted to measure her skull or put her on display. Or maybe the weight of remembering everything finally won, and the woman on the porch was the last fragment of Eliza left, coming back one final time to close the circle before she walked into the snow and let herself forget how to be found. Either way, she outlived every man who tried to own her mind. She outlived Calicut. She outlived Voss. She outlived the war, the asylum, the theories, the lies. And somewhere out there, for a little while longer, a woman who once knew the Latin name of every bone in the human body by the age of 9 may have lived quietly, anonymously, free, because one broken scientist chose to burn his reputation instead of burning her childhood. That, I think, is the closest thing to justice this story ever gets. So the next time someone tells you genius has to be recognized, has to be studied, has to be put on a stage to prove a point, remember Eliza Davis. Remember that sometimes the most extraordinary mind is the one that manages to hide in plain sight, refuses the spotlight, and still, against every odd, survives. Thank you for staying with me through this one. It's the heaviest story I've ever told on this channel, and honestly, I'm going to need a minute after recording it. If it hit you as hard as it hit me, do me a favor, share it. Not for views, not for the algorithm. Share it because a 9-year-old girl who remembered everything once asked one adult to make sure the truth didn't die with her, and almost 160 years later, we're still keeping that promise. Drop your final theory in the comments. Did she live? Did she forgive Calicut? And what would you have done in his place? I'll be reading every single one. Until the next buried truth we dig up together. Take care of each other. Some memories are too heavy to carry alone. I lied to you a moment ago. I said that was the closest thing to justice this story ever gets. It isn't. Because every few years, something else surfaces, quiet, unannounced, impossible to verify, but too precise to be coincidence. In 1954, when the Brown versus Board of Education lawyers were hunting for any historical precedent that might help dismantle, separate but equal, an elderly black nurse in Baltimore died at the age of 100. Her name on the death certificate was Elizabeth Mitchell. No children. No living relatives. The funeral home found only 2 things she wanted buried with her: a child's blue hair ribbon, so old the silk had turned to dust at the edges, and a single sheet of paper folded inside a cracked leather medical journal from 1862. The paper was a letter, undated, written in a careful adult hand that still carried traces of a child's round letters. If the world ever decides that colored children deserve the same books, the same desks, and the same chance as any other child, then maybe what happened to me will matter. Until then, let them think I vanished. Let them think perfect memory can be broken. It can't. It only learns which truths are safe to speak aloud. And which truths must be carried in silence until the day the silence itself becomes the proof. The letter was signed only with a tiny, perfect drawing of a human heart, every chamber and vessel labeled in flawless Latin, the same illustration Eliza had pointed to when she was 9 years old and still believed adults might protect her. The funeral director, not knowing what else to do, mailed the journal and ribbon to the NAACP legal team. They kept it in a file marked, miscellaneous historical, possible use. It has never been made public. I only know about it because one of the paralegals on that case is still alive, 92 now, and she told me last year, voice trembling over the phone. She wanted us to win, even if no one ever knew her name. She waited 89 years for the world to be ready for her proof. There's one more thing. In the archives of St. Elizabeth's Hospital, in a ledger that was supposed to have been destroyed in a 1950s fire, a single line survives on a carbon page that somehow escaped the flames. Patient #2847F. Admitted, June 28, 1865. Name given, Sarah M., refused further. Diagnosis, melancholia with delusions of total recall. Discharged against medical advice, November 11, 1869. Remarks in the margin, in a nurse's hurried pencil. Patient walked out at 3:17 a.m. left a note saying only, "I remember the way home." No one stopped her. We were all too afraid to touch someone who looked at you like she already knew the hour and cause of your death. November 11, 1869. The same morning the first black students were legally admitted to the University of South Carolina under Reconstruction laws. The first crack in the wall. So maybe the story doesn't end with a snowy porch in 1889. Maybe it ends with a woman in her mid-20s, thin, dressed in a borrowed nurse's coat, walking out of an asylum gate into the cold Washington dawn carrying nothing but a ribbon and 20 years of other people's nightmares, deciding that if the world wouldn't let her be a child, she would spend the rest of her life making sure other children got the childhood she never had. Maybe every time a black girl today sits in an AP calculus class and finishes the exam before the teacher hands out the pencils. Maybe every time a quiet kid in the back row corrects the textbook out loud and the whole room goes still. Maybe every time someone says, "How do you remember all that?" and the answer comes back, soft but certain, "I just do." Eliza Davis is still walking out of that gate. She just learned how to do it without anyone noticing. And if you feel something catch in your chest right now, that's her. She made it. Music swells, one last chord, then silence. That's all I have. That's all there ever will be. Thank you for carrying her this far. Now go outside tonight, look up at whatever stars you can still see through the city glow, and tell her, out loud, that we finally remembered. She's been waiting long enough. Good night.